Hello world, I am Curtis Simpson and this is Jective's Typography News. This week, Adobe announced 1,500 new fonts being added to Adobe Fonts. Monotype recently announced that Canva has surpassed 1 billion designs using Monotype typefaces, and Adobe got bullied off of Bluesky with their very first posts. For this first story, Adobe and Monotype both put out press releases, so let's go look at what each of them individually has to say, and then we'll head over to Adobe Fonts for some first-hand reporting, and we'll see what's actually changed. Starting out with Adobe's press release, you can read the headline right there: more than 1,500 new fonts, including all-time favorites, come to Adobe Fonts. This was released on April 8th, 2025 by the Adobe Fonts team, and if we scroll down, we'll be able to see some of the highlights that they want to point out for us. This is definitely not the largest press release. I'll scroll all the way down. That's it. But it is such a significant thing. So that's why we're talking about it here today. They're pointing out that they've released 1,500 new fonts. I did reach out to Adobe because I'm interested in knowing how many typefaces that actually means. If you don't know the difference between a font and a typeface, I use them interchangeably all the time. Most people do. But technically, a typeface would be Helvetica. A font would be Helvetica Thin, Helvetica Bold, Helvetica Regular, or whatever they call their regular weight. So Helvetica or Gotham or Avenir that they've got highlighted on here as being from Monotype, those might each have 20 different fonts in them. So if you've got 3 typefaces with 20 fonts, you're up to 60 new fonts already. So that really does cut down this 1,500 number quite a bit, but of course they're going to make it sound as big as possible. And 1,500 new fonts is quite large. So out of these 1,500 new fonts, over 750 of these came from Monotype. That's included in Monotype's press release. That's not included in Adobe's. We'll get there in a minute. But Adobe notes that this is the largest font expansion to Adobe Fonts in the last 5 years. They're highlighting a few different typefaces here: Helvetica, Gotham, Avenir, Times New Roman, Arial, and Proxima Nova. They're also pointing out that they're expanding the global library, so they've got support for Arabic, Chinese, Japanese, Korean, Thai, Hindi, and more. This is one thing I definitely have noticed in the type industry in the last few years. People have really been pushing for more international typefaces, more non-Latin typefaces, and it makes sense. Brands are global now. You know, the internet is global. Brands want to be able to connect with people, and they need typefaces that fit their brand voice to do that. So it's great that Adobe's including these. And the last thing that I'll point out here on the Adobe press release is that this comes at no extra cost. So whatever you're paying for Creative Cloud right now, or however you access Adobe Fonts, you get these typefaces, you get these 1,500 new fonts at the exact same price that you're already paying. Moving over to Monotype's press release for this partnership, I'll go ahead and read the headline for you again. Monotype expands collaboration with Adobe to bring hundreds of world's most renowned fonts to Creative Cloud. And I do think this is worth pointing out. Adobe doesn't point it out, but Monotype does, and that this is a long-standing relationship between these two brands. I've seen some other news report that Monotype all of a sudden is now they're collaborating with Adobe. No, this goes back to, well, Adobe Fonts was Typekit before, right? So all the way in 2009, when Adobe was putting out Typekit, Monotype was already including some of their fonts with Typekit. Over the years, they've expanded, and now they're up to over 2,800 fonts. So this is a huge update. They've got added a new 750 fonts, and now it's up to 2,800, which is huge. But even before Typekit, Monotype's fonts were a staple in Adobe's design software. So they've got a relationship going way, way, way back. And it's worth pointing out just because other outlets have been reporting that there's this new partnership. It's not a new partnership, but it is an expansion on this collaboration between the two. So let's go ahead and look at the main points for Monotype here. We scroll down. Let's go ahead and scroll back up real quick, because Monotype points out a few different fonts than Adobe does, which I find interesting. Got Helvetica, they've got Gotham, they got Avenir again, but instead they're pointing out FFDen and Benton Modern. So we'll be sure to look at those when we head over to Adobe Fonts to look at the actual platform and see what's included. But let's go ahead and scroll down for real this time. So they also put out this press release on the same day, April 8th, 2025. And I did reach out to Monotype as well. I'll get to the question that I asked them, but they have not yet responded. If either Adobe or Monotype does reply, I will go ahead and do a follow-up to this. We'll make it Typography News 4.1 or something like that, because maybe we'll be already on 5 or 6 by then. But let's see what Monotype wants to point out in this. They're stating that there are hundreds of the most popular fonts from the Monotype library and select Foundry partners. So I feel like this is worth pointing out because it's not just typefaces that Monotype created, that Monotype owns. It's actually Foundry partners of Monotype. So if you go to Monotype library or myfonts.com, they've got select foundries that they're like partners with that Monotype doesn't own yet. But that they work with closely, and that when it comes to deals like this or the one with Canva that we're going to talk about in a little bit, it's not just Monotype's library, it's also these select foundries. So that's really cool, but that 750 includes everything. That was one of the questions I did ask Adobe about. I specifically asked them, 750 of these new fonts, half of the fonts came from Monotype. Is there anyone else you want to highlight? Where did the other ones come from? We'll try and see some of that when we head over to Adobe Fonts, but it would have been nice if they would provide a list of all the fonts that were actually updated. And then some of the foundries, highlight some of the other foundries other than just Monotype, even though Monotype is the giant. So they're pointing out the same thing. They've named a few of the biggest typefaces. They're pointing out that they've got expanded language support for Arabic, Hindi, Japanese, among others. And then they're kind of throwing back to some of the case studies or the research that we looked at in one of the other episodes. We looked at this report that they put out. So that's nothing new. They're just putting it out here for news outlets to report on. What I found most interesting about this, and why we're even looking at the Monotype press release at all, is because of the quotes that were included. So I'll go ahead and read a couple of them, and then I'll tell you what I specifically asked Monotype. Let's go ahead and read this first one here from Dan Radigan. Hopefully I'm saying that right. He's the director of inventory curation at Monotype. And he said, what we love about this new extension of our long-standing partnership with Adobe is that there are now thousands of fonts from Monotype at the heart of Creative Cloud workflow, Our goal is to get our fonts and those from our amazing Foundry partners in the hands of as many creative professionals, I'm sure that's supposed to say as possible, right in the space where they design, so we can continue to elevate the world's design to new heights. I'm going to objectively report this right now. We just read what it said. I'm showing you the source. Now let me just inject a little bit of subjectivity here, because I do wonder what the goal is with Monotype, with them partnering with all these people. Maybe now that they're private, they've been owned by a private venture capital investment firm for a long time, not a long time, about 7 years. And everybody's kind of wondering what's going to happen to Monotype. These big whale contracts, maybe that's a story for another time, but these big contracts that they have with Adobe, that they have with Canva, and the fact that they've really, really nerfed the subscription model for normal independent users, people that have maybe 1 to 5 people on their team, there's no way that they would use the Monotype library subscription. I can't see why anyone would use it at all. If you can only, just to go off a little bit here, you can only use 10 fonts from the Monotype library subscription. It's way more expensive, and the license is just very limited. So I don't know why anyone individually would go use that when you could just use Adobe, or you could just use Canva, or you could use one of their other partner programs to get it. So I really do think Monotype's target market right now is these big companies and not necessarily the individual user, despite the fact that they have the world's biggest platform. They have Monotype owns myfonts.com, which is, as far as I know, the largest marketplace for fonts. So this quote is very nice, but I do wonder if that's realistic or if that's just marketing speak. Let's get back to the objective portion of this, because this is the news. Let's try to be as objective as possible. But let me go ahead and read the most interesting part of this. This is from Mike Matteo, Chief Typography Officer at Monotype. I'm going to read the whole thing, but what I'm really interested is this right here. Let me go ahead and start from the beginning. Mike Matteo, Chief Typography Officer at Monotype, pointed to the forward-thinking approach. Our deepened alliance with Adobe reflects a shared commitment to empowering creativity with precision and purpose. Design trends move fast, and businesses can't afford to lag behind. This partnership ensures Adobe Creative Cloud users have instant access to fonts that define the moment, with quarterly updates to keep them ahead of the curve. Let me repeat that. With quarterly updates to keep them ahead of the curve, maximizing both creative potential and market relevance. These fonts form the foundation of a common core of typographic expression. So 1,500 new fonts on its own is amazing. 750 new fonts from Monotype is great because no matter what you think about Monotype, the fonts that Monotype is going to provide versus a bunch of new Google fonts being added, not that there's anything wrong with Google fonts, but the quality that Monotype fonts are going to be at are, they're going to be S tier. They're going to be at least A tier. They're the top of the industry, and they're the top of the industry for a reason. So having 750 new Monotype fonts is awesome right out of the gate. Having 1,500 new fonts on Adobe Fonts at the same price is amazing. But what stands out to me there is the quarterly updates. I'm looking at the screen here. I apologize. With quarterly updates to keep them ahead of the curve. This is the only question that I reached out to the PR team at Monotype for, and I hope that I do get a response so I can create a follow-up to this, because this is the most exciting part of this to me. Are they going to be doing quarterly updates in the sense that they're going to be adding to this 2,800 font library on Adobe right now? Are they going to increase that to 2,900, 3,000 every 3 months? Or is this going to be more frustrating? And is this going to be like Netflix or who else? HBO Max or Hulu or whoever you subscribe to? And the selection available is actually going to change every 3 months, because I think that's going to be incredibly frustrating. And I 100% subjectively can see Adobe and Monotype doing this. I can see them adding Helvetica and Avenir and Gotham for 3 months. And then, like a good movie leaves Netflix, like The Office leaves Netflix and goes to Peacock that no one wants to subscribe to, they take them away. And 3 months later, you can only buy them from My Fonts, or you can only buy them from, basically a Monotype-owned platform. So I'm really interested to see what happens 3 months from now, 6 months from now, a year from now. Do these big heavy hitter typefaces stay on Adobe Fonts? Or are these quarterly updates going to be rotations of fonts, and they're going to stick near or at that 2,800 font number? We're going to get new ones, but they're going to take away old ones the way that streaming services do. I wouldn't put it past them, but objectively, they have not responded to that. So let's keep it to the facts. That's what they said, with quarterly updates to keep them ahead of the curve. I'm speculating and wondering what that really means. Hopefully we get an answer. I did reach out to the PR team. There's a direct PR contact at the bottom of the page here. It is Charlotte Simcock. So I reached out to her. Maybe we'll hear back from Charlotte. If we do, I will let you know. Now, let's get to the firsthand reporting. Let's go look at Adobe Fonts, and we'll see what actually changed over there, because this is a pretty great update. Here we are over on Adobe Fonts, and if you're not familiar with this, what it is if you pay for Adobe Creative Cloud, you get access to Adobe Fonts. And basically, you can just use whatever you want. It works in all of the Adobe software. You just click Add to Family, and then you can actually, inside of Adobe Fonts on your PC or on your iPad or whatever, you can actually install it on your machine so that you can use it in other software. So for me, I use Adobe Fonts, but then I install them to my PC and I use them in Affinity. Sacrilege, I know, but I love having access to all these typefaces, but I want to use Affinity software. So let me just show you how it works real quick. I know most of you probably already know this, but you can favorite stuff, you can change your languages. There's a lot of good sorting here. Some people don't like these tags. I talked about this when we were doing the type design stuff, because there's not really a great way to classify typefaces. There is a way to do it, but this is how Adobe's chosen to do it, and they're basically doing it much more vibey than doing, humanist sans, modern, slab serif. They've got all of these weird things. There are ways, though. They've got some classification right here. It's minimal: sans serif, serif, slab serif, script, mono, and hand. So at least if you want to go find a monotype, monospaced font, you can do that. The problem that I have with this is that most of these things aren't real. You can click on serif and get sans serif. You can click on script and not get script. So I find the classifications and the filtering to be very frustrating, but I don't use them that often. So this is pretty great. You can do number of fonts in the family, and this is what I was talking about before. Number of fonts in the family. So that 1500 number that they added, it's not 1500 font families or typefaces. It's 1500 fonts. But these filters here, they do work pretty well. The weight, whether it's got bold or thin, the width, like how wide or expanded or condensed the typeface is. If you're wanting to put those little credits at the bottom of a movie poster, I'd probably just go look and see what that typeface is and grab the exact one. But you can do condensed and try to find a super compressed typeface. You want contrast, you're basically either going to go modern or you're going to go monoline, or something in between that's going to be much more legible. But yeah, you've got all the things that we've been talking about with the typography books that we've gone over. You can even do double story A or single story A. Does it have italics? Does it have standard, or is it caps only? If it's caps only, that's basically a display font. But yeah, so now that we've looked at that, let's go ahead and look at hide the filters. Let's see what's new. They've got it sorted automatically by featured. We want to go to newest. When I first started Jectives, I actually was keeping track of Adobe on here. I had a table in Notion, and I was checking Adobe fonts every week. I was checking Google fonts every week, and I was trying to see, I was going to, keep track of the new typefaces that were added. I found out very quickly they don't add typefaces very often. You would think rather than adding 1,500 all at once, they would trickle them in, a new typeface here or there every week. But they don't do that. It probably has something to do with licensing and things like that. But you can see right off the bat, heavy hitters: Den 1451, Franklin Gothic, Century Gothic, Benton Modern. They got some Microsoft fonts here. But you can see they've got the non-Latin characters. Since I think most of us watching this video right now are going to be speaking English, they're probably going to want to see the Latin characters. I'm going to go ahead and set it to English, because then we'll be able to see fonts that I'm actually familiar with, and we can talk about those a little easier. So the filtering works great. Like I said, a lot of people are pushing to include more global typography. So if you need a Japanese font, just go click on Japanese right there. You'll see all Japanese typefaces instead. Lucida, Lucida Grande, Lucida Console. I'm like 99% sure Lucida Grande is what used to be used on Macs. If it wasn't used on Mac, it's what used to be used on the keyboard. I do know that it used to be used in Mac OS. Baskerville, I think they already had some version of Baskerville, but this is Monotype's Baskerville. There it is. It's not just Helvetica that's added. They've got Helvetica New. They've got Helvetica, I think, World or Helvetica Now. They've got the original Helvetica. Universe Next. See, this has 59 fonts in just Universe Next. And I'm pretty sure Universe Next is also a variable. Bembo. I mean, this is a great update. There's FFDen right there. Yeah, Helvetica New World. I don't know. Monotype themselves have put out all these different versions of Helvetica, and I'm not sure what the difference is between them. Maybe that's a video for another day. Times New Roman, if you have a PC, I think even Mac probably has that as a default, but now you've got it and you have it licensed the right way. Nexa, they've got it listed here as Monotype. Let me go ahead and click on this, because Nexa is actually created by Font Fabric. Oh, they have the designer's name here, but they're calling it Monotype. So this is what I was talking about before, where Monotype is including all of their select Foundry partners in this 750. But you can see this here alone has 36 fonts. So it's a single typeface with 36 fonts. And actually, let me go back one page. And you can see at the top of this here, this is all of the English. So there's actually not a lot of other ones. Let's go ahead and hit all real quick, and we'll be able to see 4,951 font families. So that's not the number of fonts that they're talking about when they talk about 1,500 new fonts. Den here only has one font in it, so this font family only has one font. But you go to Franklin Gothic, it's got 10 fonts, and they're calling this a font family. I think most people would call this a typeface, but Adobe's doing Adobe here. Okay, so they've got almost 5,000. They've got 4,951 font families. If we change it to English, we'll find out how many. So they've really only got, what is that, 39? 51 down to 12. Quick maths. Yeah, I think that's 39, right? So they've got 39 other languages other than English. Some of these typefaces, though, include multiple languages. So you've got fonts. Gosh, what is that font? I can't think of what Adobe's font is. Adobe basically made not Adobe, Google made a typeface that basically has every language in the world, but they're all under the same name. Someone can shout it out in the comments. Tahoma, that's nice. But if we just look at the English fonts here, there's still almost 5,000 typefaces, or 5,000 typefaces. Some of these are Monotype fonts, some of them are Adobe fonts, some of them are Google fonts, but some of them come from independent type foundries like Letterer. I always say it long, Letterer, who made Beowulf, Sans, which is what Jectives uses for the logo is Sans. And they're not a part of either one. You know, they sell their typeface on lots of platforms. They sell them individually, but you can get it included in the Adobe Fonts subscription. Got some typefaces here from Microsoft. So it looks like Microsoft and Monotype are both being included in this update. Yeah, there's quite a few typefaces from Microsoft, which makes sense why they were saying Arial was included. So it looks like there's a decent number of typefaces or fonts included from Microsoft. Verdana. We talked about that in the Designing Type video. Flip through book review. Zapfino, that's nice. That's from Monotype. Posterama, that's nice. Yeah, so let's go ahead and just flip through a few more. Swiss 721. And you can see right away Snell Roundhand. That's nice. That's going to be a good one for some of the fancy wedding invitations or things like that. Parliament, that's a great one. This is by Hofler and Co. I don't know, is it Hofler or Heffler? Gosh, I should probably know how to say this. But yeah, they're Hofler and Co. I'm going to say Hofler. It's probably Heffler and Co. Anyway, they sold out. They were bought by Monotype, and so they're part of Monotype now. They still operate independently, I believe, but in terms of stuff like this, they're being included in that select foundry, and they're, I believe, exclusive to like their own website and then Monotype websites. I could be wrong, because now you can get it from all of these different collaborations or partnerships that Monotype's got going on. So, Georgia. Yeah, so you've got a lot of Microsoft typefaces and a lot of Monotype typefaces on here. So far, those are the only two names that we've seen included on these new list of fonts here. So that seems to be, it might be 750 from Microsoft and 750 from Monotype. Comic Sans, everyone's favorite punching bag. Courier New, that's nice. So a lot of these are probably included on your machine if you have a PC, but Frutiger. But now you have them licensed. It is much easier to do licensing and not to worry about it with your team. As long as everyone has Adobe Fonts, that is. Dingbats, that's a nice one. Zap Dingbats. Hoefler text. This is what was used by, oh gosh, I can't remember now if it was Biden or if it was Obama. One of them used this in their campaign. And there's the big boy. There's Helvetica. We finally got to it. Bodoni. This is ITC Bodoni. So ITC, you'll see a lot of fonts labeled ITC. They were bought out by Monotype as well. Yeah, a ton of type foundries have been bought out by Monotype. And that's one reason why there's a little bit of backlash, a little bit of bad feelings towards Monotype. You know, it's similar to Adobe. When you've got these big giants, people don't necessarily love it. But so you've got Avenir Next, and now you've got Avenir Next World. Okay, I think I'm understanding here. If we click on Monotype Next World, I'm pretty sure this is one of those fonts like I was talking about before. So Avenir Next World, you've got Avenir, but then you've also got the other languages included in this. So is there a way to switch this? No, it doesn't look like it. But this is going to have, so if you wanted to use Avenir, and then you wanted to remain consistent in Japan, you can use Avenir Next World. I'm assuming they have Japanese, but you can use Avenir Next World and still be on point in Japan with the same fonts. Bank Gothic, that's a big one. I do think, ooh, did you see avant-garde there? I do think that sometimes these typefaces are not the full, they don't include all the glyphs sometimes, they don't include all the weights sometimes. I know Bayo Sans has like 2 different weights of the typeface that I don't have access through Adobe. So if there's a typeface that you really want to use for your brand, you're probably still going to go license that directly. But look at here. This is another big one. Accidens Grotesque. That's like the original Helvetica, right? Got a few different versions of Baskerville on here. Yeah, I think this will be the last page we go through because you can go through this on your own too. But you know, sometimes you like to go through, I like to watch people go through things like this sometimes when I'm doing dishes or doing something else, because, you know, sometimes you don't have the time to look through these yourself. We're kind of getting to, let me go through just a couple more pages. Now we're kind of getting to something that isn't Microsoft and isn't Monotype. And we've got Dave Rowland Type. I'm not familiar with Dave Rowland. I'll have to add him to my Foundry database. But Josh Ownby, not sure. Typotype, I am familiar with that. Or maybe it's Typotype. But now we're getting to some more independent foundries. So you are starting to see some foundries other than Monotype. It doesn't look like they have huge typeface additions here. And then we're getting into some Adobe originals. So I know that Adobe at Aldine variable, I know that this was recently added, so we might be getting to the end of the additions here. That would kind of make sense. So we're kind of getting to the end of the new fonts, and that's perfect, so we can wrap this portion of the typography news up. But I think just scrolling through those right now, I think we saw a great number of really, really high quality typefaces. And I'm pretty excited to go through these. I think anyone working, working with Adobe Fonts is going to be excited with these. One thing to remember, though, that people do find frustrating is that if you're working with clients, you can't just use Helvetica right here and then let them, you can't just give them Helvetica to use on all of their stuff. You know, you can make their logo with Helvetica, but if they want to use it on their website, unless you're managing their website, maybe they even still need to do it. You could add it to a web project. But unless they pay to license this, unless they pay for Adobe Fonts or they, independently go out and license Helvetica from Monotype, a client can't actually use these typefaces. So if you're a freelancer, you are going to have that talk with clients and explain to them that if they want to use one of these fonts, they need to pay for it themselves. But for someone that is doing, that just wants to use these fonts for themselves, or they want to use it for projects that they're working on, products that they're putting out, you've got a lot more very good typefaces to work with in Adobe Fonts. This next story isn't quite as breaking news as the Adobe one, but it also involves Monotype, and they reached 1 billion with a B, designs created using their typefaces on Canva. This press release from Monotype came out on March 27th, 2025. Interestingly, I haven't heard very many people talk about this, and I almost didn't talk about it. Canva themselves didn't even put out a press release about this, but Monotype did. We're going to take a look at their press release, and then we'll head over to Canva, and I can just demonstrate that the fonts there are available, because I was shocked by this when I first saw this headline. And then Adobe, got a bunch of those same typefaces. So I feel like these two stories go together. That's why we're going to go ahead and cover them. But it really does point out the fact that Canva is like this, I don't know. I know that it's not used by a lot of professionals, but I have talked to friends that I went to design school with. They exclusively design in Canva now. And I kind of, a lot of designers kind of poo-pooed it for a while, like, oh, it's not real design software. But, my friend said, who has been a professional designer for over a decade now, told me from her experience, yes, lots of non-designers, non-professionals use Canva and they use the templates and things like that, but designers are still going to create higher quality designs, better products, better results. And that's just because they've got that design education or, experience at least. They've got the aesthetic eye. So Canva is just another tool, just like Adobe, just like Affinity, just like anything else. And Monotype is partnering with them. They're continuing to grow that library. So let's take a look at where that started, and we'll see how they got up to that 1 billion fonts, or 1 billion, not fonts, 1 billion designs created using Monotype fonts. So here we are back over on Monotype's newsroom. As I said, this was released on March 27th, 2025. Let's go ahead and read the headline. Monotype and Canva celebrate over 1 billion designs created using Monotype library. So once again, this is going to be Monotype's library and their select Foundry partners. But there are a few different things that I wanted to point out here. We're going to hop back and forth actually between this press release and the one from 2023. So you can see the link right here. That's where we're going to go. But they celebrated more than 1 billion designs, and this only took them 2 years. If we click on this press release, this was announced in 2023. They announced their partnership then. They were adding 1,100 curated fonts to the Canva platform, providing greater global access to creativity and design. That last line is marketees, but the facts are the facts. This was released March 6th, 2023. If we go back, this is March 27th, 2025. 2 years to hit 1 billion designs. I will point out, at the time of writing this in 2023, Canva had 110 million monthly active users. So the 1 billion number is objectively impressive. It's a huge number of designs. It's a huge number of designs to be created in general. That tells you how big Canva is, that 1 billion designs were created alone using Monotype typefaces, not just, in general. I think at the time in 2023, let's scroll down real quick. I think there were, so in February of 2023, Canva hit the milestone of 15 billion designs being created. 2 years later, designs using Monotype hit 1 billion. What I wanted to point out though is this 110 million monthly active users. If each of them used 10 Monotype fonts, or not even Monotype fonts, if each of them used Monotype fonts in 10 different designs, that would have hit the billion mark in a day or in a month. I don't know what to make of that. The billion is absolutely a very impressive number, but with 110 million monthly active users in 2023, I almost expect that number to have been hit faster. But the thing might be, a lot of people probably use the default fonts. A lot of people probably use templates. So maybe they're not, maybe they don't have any reason to care about Helvetica or Gotham or, any of these typefaces. So let's go ahead and go back and look at the press release that came last month at the end of March. And in 2023, they announced the partnership was going to include a curated selection of 1,100 fonts. Now, they've got a collection of more than 1,800 curated typefaces. So it is curious that they say typefaces here. I think this might be just like they misspoke, and it's actually fonts, because I can't imagine that they would use fonts in one section and say typefaces in another. You would think that they would want to pump that up as big as they could. So I'm just going to assume here, they've grown from 1,100 up to 1,800. So in 2 years, they've added an extra 700 fonts to Canva. And then, we saw in our last story, they added 750 to Adobe. But if we compare the two, Adobe had 2,800, Canva has 1,800, which makes sense. The professional design software is going to be, they're going to place more value on having access to those typefaces than a lot of the non-professional use that's done with Canva. But I do think some of the quotes here, once again, are interesting. And particularly for me, this time the quotes come from the foundries. So there are some quotes here from senior executives at Monotype. There are some from senior VPs at Canva. But let's go down to the type foundries and type designers, because I find this to be the most interesting part. There are 3 different ones here. Let's just go ahead and read the first one. This is from Ray Larrabee, founder of Typography Fonts. Seeing my fonts in Canva's library gets me fired up, and here's why. They're blazing a different trail for how people discover and work with fonts. Canva's cracking open the door for the next generation of designers to work with professional fonts from day one. As typeface designers, we want our fonts to get used, and this is breaking down traditional barriers between my fonts and new designers. I think that quote from Ray is the most interesting part of this story. Yes, the 1 billion number is huge. Yes, I think professional designers underestimate how big Canva is and how many professionals and enterprise users there are now. Because to hit 1 billion with just Monotype fonts, that's crazy. But like I said, I think this quote from Ray Larrabee is the most, hopefully I'm saying that last name right, I think that is the most interesting part of this story. Because I do think what separates the high quality designs from what looks amateur is access to these typefaces. And type designers, at least the ones that I've spoke to, want designers, graphic designers, want people in general to be able to use their fonts. What they want is to create a typeface, and then they want to see it out in the world. They want people to use it. They want people to buy it. They want to be able to earn a living doing what they love, crafting typefaces, but they want people to use it. When I spoke to Eric over at Letterer, gosh, so many, I apologize to everyone from the Netherlands. I very much struggle with Dutch names. I'll get better because Dutch typography is so important. Getting off track here. But when I spoke to him about Beo Sands, he didn't tell me go buy, he didn't suggest that I go buy it from his website, which is what I was talking to him about doing. And I was having a conversation with him about web fonts. Anyway, he directed me to Adobe Creative Cloud. I see a lot of type designers who sell their typefaces directing people to Creative Cloud. Which is strange because I'm not sure how the licensing and the payment and things like that work. But if you think about the music industry, artists wanted people to buy their CDs. They didn't want them to stream them because they weren't making as much money from streaming. They 100% didn't want people to steal the music and download it from, Napster or LimeWire or burn a CD or whatever. But prior to starting Jectives, I always assumed that designers would prefer you to buy the typeface from them. I think in the end, they just want people to use the fonts. And I think that is one thing that Canva and Monotype are doing. Obviously it's a capitalist society. These things, they're in this to make money. They're doing these partnerships. Monotype is licensing to Canva. I'm assuming Canva's paying them so that so that they can earn money. Canva's doing it so that more users will see this as professional software, so that more people will sign up for Canvas Pro or Canva Pro or whatever their subscription model is called. So there are financial incentives, but at the end of the day, whatever they are doesn't matter because designers are getting access to these typefaces. And non-professionals are getting access to these typefaces, and that's what type designers want. I think it's a win-win for everyone. We'll see how this plays out. I do think there is a bit of subscription fatigue. I think I've mentioned that in one of my other videos before, and I mentioned in this video, I use Affinity. I have a subscription that gives me access to Adobe Fonts, but I don't pay for the full Creative Suite. I don't pay for any design subscriptions other than Adobe Fonts. So I don't know how the subscription model plays out here. You know, people are learning when they don't own physical video games anymore. Someone can just wipe that video game from their Steam library, or if they want. Steam might be a bad example. They're pretty good about it. But the same thing happens with Kindle books. You know, I had a Kindle textbook. It was a typography or design book. I can't remember which one. But I had a Kindle textbook that I bought when I was studying in school. And I just assumed like Amazon's always going to be around. I'll always have access to this. I'm not going to lose it. Why buy a physical book that I have to lug around? And what happened? The author put out a new edition of the book. So maybe I owned the second or third edition. She puts out the fourth or fifth edition. She revokes the license, or the publisher revokes the license to that Kindle ebook, and Amazon takes it away. They don't give me the new one. I don't get to keep the book that I paid for, even though, you know, the Kindle and the textbook probably cost about the same amount. I didn't get to keep that typography book that I paid for, because what I paid for was access to it via a license. And I do wonder if people are going to hit a subscription fatigue with some of these typefaces, or with some of these typeface offerings. And I do wonder what's going to happen with that potential like rotating quarterly update with Monotype and Adobe. I wonder what's going to happen with Monotype and Canva. It'll be an interesting thing to see, because right now, yes, absolutely, this provides incredible access. The value that you get from paying like, I don't know, if you pay for just InDesign, or not InDesign, if you just pay for InCopy, I'll give you my secret. This is how I get access to Adobe Fonts. I pay for InCopy. I don't even have it on my computer. I don't. But paying for InCopy through Adobe gives me access to Adobe Fonts. You can pay for just Illustrator and get access to Adobe Fonts. But InCopy is the cheapest one. I looked to see what it was. I paid for it by 1 year subscription or whatever. I think it came out to like $4 or $5 a month. And I get access to this 30,000 fonts from Adobe. And now that they've added these fonts for Monotype, I get access to all of these great typefaces. For me, I'm reporting the news. I'm using these typefaces to help better showcase, you know, what's available to you, to talk about typography, talk about books, these types of things. For me, I don't need to keep access to this, but if you're a brand and you're using Helvetica for your brand typeface, and you've got it on your website, and you've got it in your print material, and you've got it in all these places, and then all of a sudden, like Netflix loses The Office to Peacock, what if there is some, you know, what if Monotype decides we don't want to keep all of these things on Canva, we don't want to keep them on Adobe, we don't want to keep them on all these different platforms. We want to be Peacock, we want to have everything. Come subscribe to Monotype, and it just disappears from all these platforms. I do think that's a concern over purchasing the typefaces outright. So pay a lot now to have your perpetual license to a typeface, especially from an independent foundry. You're going to get a perpetual license. You know, always check to see what it is, but pay now for access to be able to use this typeface for infinity if you're buying it for your company, or pay a monthly fee to Adobe or Canva to be able to use this while you pay that subscription. Because remember, you can design a logo for yourself and you can use that logo forever with that font on it. But if you want to use that font on your website, you need an active subscription to however you're getting this license. I know we're a little off topic, but that's why I'm reporting on these two news stories, because that's why I think that they're relevant. this is what's going on in the industry. Monotype's doing these huge partnerships, giving people access to amazing fonts at a very good value, you know, a small, almost tiny monthly payment. But it rhymes with Netflix and, you know, the original streaming model that was like $7 a month, and you had access to almost everything, you know, every TV show, because there wasn't Max, there wasn't Hulu existed, but there wasn't Peacock, and everyone didn't have their own version of streaming. It was all just on Netflix. Luckily, Monotype's kind of putting these everywhere, but I do wonder what's going to happen. What's going to happen? Let's move on. Let's move on, because the same way that I'm a little skeptical about this, subjectively, other people are not loving Adobe and Monotype right now, and that has never been more obvious than when Adobe put out their first post on Bluesky this week. Here we are on Bluesky, and quick shout out to myself. This is jectives.com on Bluesky. This is the only social media. I'm only on, Jectives is only on YouTube. It's only on Bluesky, and then jectives.com, obviously. But if you're on Bluesky, go ahead and give me a follow, because on here I'm posting things before they come stories, talking about things that are not included on YouTube. I'm also doing some shameless self-promotion and posting the YouTube videos on here. But I also have created, on Bluesky, you can create custom feeds. So I've created a font feed. It's only typography. I do my absolute best to keep all of the toxicity. There's no, like this Twitter thing snuck in here. But I try to keep all of the political stuff out of it. I try to keep all of the, just all of the arguments out of it. And I try to keep it as strictly typography focused as possible. It's not even graphic design. It's just typography. So you can see, I haven't been on today, but I've set up the algorithm pretty well. There's me again. I've set up the algorithm pretty well to only showcase typography and only showcase good typography to the best of my ability. You know, I don't have all day to sit and watch this, but I think that you'll enjoy the font feed if you do enjoy typography. And if you're on Bluesky, you know, check it out. The real reason we're here, though, is Adobe. Here is Adobe's profile on Bluesky. Conspicuously empty. They've got their logo. They've got no header. They've got no posts. They did have a post, though, and they got roasted so hard they got bullied off of the platform, essentially. Like I said, Adobe did delete this post, but here's what it said before. It's got 1,000 quotes on it right now, which means that someone reposted this and added their own commentary to it. It's also got 1.6 thousand comments and only 50 likes. So they got ratioed pretty hard on this. Let's read what it says. It's pretty innocuous, and then let's see if we can find the remnants of the replies. Hey, we're Adobe. We're here to connect with artists, designers, and storytellers who bring ideas to life. What's fueling your creativity right now? Paint palette. Drop a reply, tag a creator, or share your latest work. We'd love to see what inspires you. Pretty positive, right? There's probably going to be quite a few cuts in this segment because a lot of the replies were pretty toxic. A lot of the replies were pretty offensive. So I'm going to point out the general sentiment so you can get an idea of what took place and what, you know, followed up in the last 4 days. But it's important to point out, first of all, that this response to Adobe was not a response it was not a response to this post in particular. It's a response to Adobe's subscription pricing, and it's a response to Adobe's AI policies. So let's go ahead and scroll through. We'll see what we find. And you'll get an idea of what transpired. This is basically sums it up right here. Blue Spark. Adobe starts to say hello. Bluesky just destroys them. This is one that I saw going around that I don't feel is particularly insightful or helpful or anything. It's basically just dunking for some reason. Repost if you have more followers than Adobe. Like, okay, anybody could say that about anybody. I don't know. I guess it's the whole like punching up versus punching down. But yeah, you're seeing people, this has 6,000 almost likes on it. And to put that in perspective on Bluesky, that's a pretty big number. But look this, I'm glad Adobe's getting savagely dunked on. It was a beautiful form of bullying. This person got blocked by Adobe for whatever their comment was. See, other people on here, they're just saying like, these are the Adobe accounts to block and bully. So they're basically saying like, go bully these accounts. I don't know in what other context this would be acceptable. I don't think there necessarily is one, but basically people are mad at Adobe. And I think that, look at this, someone just throwing Adobe out of a window. I think despite the fact that Adobe is including, they're releasing stuff like adding more fonts, 1,500 new fonts, people still just aren't happy with them because of their policies in general. So like I said, this took place like 4 days ago, Adobe Photo Slop. Yeah, I've seen that going around. I'm not sure who said it first, but it's basically a play on AI slop, which is definitely a problem. This is another thing people were doing. So every time people want to get away from Adobe, this post gets put out. I think it could probably use an update, but basically it's all of the Adobe alternatives. Here's a person that has been using Adobe since 1994. Hi, Adobe. I'd been a Photoshop user since 1994, but I hate your subscription model, so I bought Clip Studio and it does everything Photoshop could do for one low price, and the license lasts forever. Wow, thanks for forcing me to use a better product. Like, this person wasn't even saying anything toxic, but it does point out the general sentiment, right? Like, Adobe is doing all of these things to improve its products, objectively and subjectively. Some people like the AI stuff, some people hate the AI stuff. But objectively, having more typefaces to choose from in Adobe Fonts at no extra cost is improving the product. But it doesn't matter. People don't like the subscription model, like I said before. Here's a larger list of Adobe alternatives. This is the 2025 edition, so it's probably a little more up to date than that one that's been shared for quite a while. But yeah, you can see the memes. A lot of meme culture going on here. Just Squidward yelling at SpongeBob and Patrick to go away. It's essentially what happened. Adobe showed up, Bluesky just screamed, and they left. It is funny, though, because they didn't really say anything. I mean, you saw the post. They didn't say anything particularly, offensive or something that people should be mad about. I think this is the best one, though. I don't know if this is the original person that posted this. Probably not. I saw it posted quite a few times, but maybe it was. This is who we're seeing it posted by right now. OMG, who invited Adobe to the party? And this is basically what happened. Some of these memes are incredibly accurate. For the record, Jectives was not part of this. Witnessed it, did not participate. No interest in participating in this kind of stuff. But I'm reporting on it because I do think that it demonstrates the industry, the type industry that we're in right now. I mean, Adobe is more than just typography, but this is objectively what happened. Adobe showed up. People told them to F off. We use DaVinci Resolve. Some people just, posted the expletives. Some people posted very explicit things. And you can see there's a general sentiment, at least on Bluesky, that doesn't appreciate Adobe. And some of this is piling on. Obviously, a lot of this is just dogpiling on. People, I don't know, people get excited about these things. It's not Twitter, but it has that, all these people, most of these people came from Twitter. I didn't, so I'm not used to this culture, this social media culture. I'm not really a fan of it. But I do think that there are a lot of very loud voices. I don't know if they're the minority or if they're the majority. Like, people scream the loudest about Call of Duty on Reddit, and there are, I don't know, maybe 1,000 people screaming about Call of Duty, but there are millions of people that play Call of Duty. So Call of Duty makes policies that the majority of people enjoy when they play the game, or at least the things that make them the most money. But the loudest voices are, the ones posting stuff like this. whether it's Adobe or Call of Duty or Monotype or Amazon, it is always morally correct to bully Adobe. Let's just go ahead and end on that one, because I think that it captures the general sentiment of what transpired on Bluesky following Adobe's first post. Adobe did post from like their Photoshop account and their Creative Cloud account, and it was basically all the same stuff. Bluesky just bullied them down until they deleted all of their posts and basically abandoned the platform. I don't know that they won't come back. Maybe they won't. I don't think that they're going to come back anytime soon. But if you search on Reddit for Monotype or Adobe, you see kind of the same sentiment about both companies. And I used to be subscribed to Monotype library subscription. Yeah, I think it was called Monotype library subscription. I've mentioned this before. I was subscribed to them before I started Jectives, because they had a great value for the fonts. And now a lot of those we can see they're being added onto other platforms, so that's great. I used to be subscribed to them, and I would hear people talk about how much they hated Monotype, how much Monotype was ruining the typography industry, how they were buying everything up. You know, they were just basically this bully in the industry. They were creating a monopoly. And I think the general sentiment is similar to Adobe. People don't like the subscription model. People don't like the AI policy. But I do wonder, is that just the squeaky wheel? You know, is that the loud minority that people are paying attention to, that the news is going to report on, like me? You know, this is something that happened, I'm going to report on it. I don't know how many millions of users Adobe has that quietly use the subscription and love it. I was one of those people. I loved Adobe Illustrator. Like, I just did. But I didn't use the software enough. And once I started using DaVinci, then I wasn't using Premiere anymore. And the software that I was using kept getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And the only reason I stuck around was because I wanted access to Adobe Fonts. Once I switched over to Affinity, I didn't need it. And then I found that way to get Adobe Fonts through InCopy. I'm set right now. I'm happy. I'm not an Adobe hater. I don't agree with everything they do, but when I was paying for the subscription, I was happy to pay for it. I enjoyed having access to all of the Creative Cloud suite. All the products work pretty well together. But this isn't about why I've stopped using Adobe. This is about the general sentiment. And I do wonder, is the sentiment on Bluesky that took place this past week when Adobe made their first post, is that indicative of like the general sentiment about Adobe? Or is that just this loud minority screaming and screaming and screaming? I think you see a similar thing with politics, right? You've got like the super far right, you've got the super far left. I'm not sure which one is which on the screen right now. This is my right hand. I don't know if it's the super far right, they're screaming crazy things. The super far left, they're screaming crazy things. Most people are just quiet. They're just sitting in the middle, chilling, minding their own business, living their own lives. They don't have time for all this nonsense. Are the people screaming about Call of Duty on the Call of Duty subreddit the minority? Yeah, I think so. I think the people that enjoy the game are just playing the game. Are the people that are screaming about Adobe on Bluesky the minority? It's entirely possible. It's entirely possible that the vast majority of people are content with Adobe, or at least don't really care enough to like complain about it. Maybe their employer pays for the subscription. Maybe the employers think that it's a good value. It's the industry standard. What can you do? Maybe they don't, see an alternative. I don't know. But at least some portion of the user base has left Adobe. And this user base that left Adobe is very emotional about it. They're very vocal about it. And they vehemently dislike the subscription model. And they dislike the AI stance. Maybe that's a conversation for a future episode, AI and typography, because there are some integrations already taking place. But that's going to do it for this episode. This has been the 4th episode of Typography News. This is Jectives. I am Curtis Simpson, and I will see you in the next one.